We've just arrived at Weihenstephan Garden and Nursery, and it's a really important place historically. There was a very influential book in the 80s and 90s by Hansen and Stahl, Perennials in Their Garden Habitats, and a lot of the studies required to compile the information in that book occurred here. So that very influential book has its origins for me right back in my early days of mucking around with perennials, and so this place looms large in my history. It also happens to be the place that Cassian Schmidt did an internship in the past. He's now the director of Hermanshof Garden and doing some really intense studies into perennials and plant communities. So it all really pivots on studies done here, and it's very exciting to be here. There's nowhere in Australia that grows perennials, really, or any plants in a truly comparative way. So here I am, surrounded by rectangular beds full of plants sitting side by side in such a way that I can compare different leaf forms, different flowering times, different flowering colours. This is, for me, pure heaven. I mean, look at this. This is a whole lot of different forms of Hydrangea paniculata, all the different rich pinks that have been emerging over the last few years, all in two big beds. So you've got them neatly labelled and you can compare every characteristic of their growth right here. It's fantastic. Honestly, if any one of the sections of this nursery was in Australia, we'd be just mad for it. And yet, everywhere you look, there are these sections of moist prairie planting, of dry steppe planting, of rock garden planting, just done to perfection. It's hard to tell from the signage because none of it's in English, and it's not even really traceable. You can't work out what you're reading at all. But clearly there are colour schemes going on within certain plant communities and ranges, and in this case it's a whole border of creamy white flower heads, really, with this huge yellow Rudbeckia with the black eye repeating all the way down. That's all that's in there. There's a bit of white Cleome, but there's not much white flower as such. It's mostly seed heads. And directly opposite on the other side, down this path, is a whole lot of red and pink detail. Probably plants that require not dissimilar conditions, but completely different colour range. This is such an object lesson in how little you need to have in flower, as long as you've got enough textural impact. And here, with foliage textures and then the textures of the seed heads, that makes up perhaps 90 to 95%, at least, actually, of what you're seeing. Other than that, a little bit of Rudbeckia, a little bit of Zinnia, a little bit of Ami, a little bit of Cleome, but very little in bloom. If you could delete the flower from this, it wouldn't make that much difference, or at least you would discover it's probably a minute percentage of what you're seeing, but what you read is something fully in bloom. We're standing in the rock garden, and I know I never want a garden like this. Actually, I've got to say though, as far as rock gardens go, I kind of like this really rectangular thing going on here. But it's so amazing to come to a place where everything is so perfectly labelled and so perfectly looked after in such a way that you might be able to find the one or two plants that are perfect for the job that you're doing, and see it grown this beautifully. So this is never for me about wanting to do all of this. It's about tracing the perfect plant from this huge range for whatever role I have in my head for a plant to perform. At this time of the year, it really feels to me like this step planting is by far the least appealing, but that's because most of the plants here come from dry zones, dry summer zones, and therefore have to opportunistically grab the water while it's there in springtime and into early summer. So most of it's over by now, but texturally it's still full of interest. And you can imagine at times it just looks so lovely. I love the way they repeat things around. So say the digitalis or the verbascums, creating these really strong upright lines, are doing it right across the whole space. There's beautiful patterns going on underlying this otherwise largely flowerless carpet. How cool is that? It's sometimes not clear what's a herbaceous perennial and what isn't. And in a situation like this, what I'm loving is they're using what effectively is a tree and mixing it with herbaceous perennials. This is Erythrina Christogalli, which you can cut back really hard back to stumps, and it shoots out these long wands that terminate in these incredible tapering flower heads with this velvety kind of blood red heads of pea-like flowers. And in this case, mixing them with red zinnias as well, kind of validating that colour. It's a really exciting mix, and certainly the colder the climate you're in, the more likely that Erythrina Christogalli will behave like a herbaceous perennial. And you can do the same kind of thing with fuchsias. Cut them really hard so you get an almost herbaceous perennial response. As we're walking up the path approaching this area, you could see these great big repeated blobs of purple cotinus, and really rich and wonderful. And then spot a bit of purple cleome amongst it and go, it's going to be purple, you know, like, and didn't expect then in arriving here, looking down here, to see just this little sparkles of gaura, like little butterflies hovering in there, and a bit of anemone as well. And the white in amongst all that purple totally changes it, totally transforms it. You delete that and it all becomes a little bit too somber and quiet. I mean, purple's nice, but you don't need, you know, a whole border of it. It doesn't seem to work all that well when that's all you've got. But that little spark of white, those little highlights, just transform it completely.